The bell rang, sharp and shrill, slicing through the air like a reminder that time belonged to someone else. The hallway flooded with noise, backpacks thudding against lockers, sneakers squeaking, voices rising in chaotic chorus. He moved through it like a ghost. Not invisible, but untouchable in a different way. Kids passed him by without seeing him, like he was furniture or a shadow. He didn't push. He didn't speak. He just walked with his head down, arms tucked close to his sides. The classroom door was already half shut when he slipped through it. The teacher didn't look up. She rarely did. His desk waited for him in the back corner, worn at the edges, marked with carved initials from kids long gone. He sat down and opened his workbook, flipping past the first 10 pages he hadn't completed. The room filled slowly, desks scraping against tile, the shuffle of papers, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. The lesson started. Words filled the board. Sentences. Diagrams. Instructions. He watched them appear, one by one, like a language written in water. Everyone else seemed to understand, pens moving, notebooks filling. He stared at the page in front of him, then copied the shapes. Not the words. The shapes. He knew how to make it look like he was writing. Knew how to keep his eyes low and his pencil busy just enough to avoid being noticed. The teacher walked past his desk once, then twice. Her heels tapped like judgment. Her eyes flicked to his paper but didn't stop. He felt the heat of her silence more than any words. At lunch, he sat alone. Not because he liked the quiet, but because it was safer. Words were dangerous. Words meant questions. And he had too many of those already. He watched the others joke, shout, eat too quickly. He opened his lunchbox. The sandwich was stale. The apple bruised. He ate slowly anyway. One bite at a time. One breath at a time. The janitor passed by, pushing his cart down the hall. He always did it around this time. Always nodded once. Always moved without hurry. Today he stopped. He didn't speak. He just set something on the table. A small notebook. Spiral bound. Blank. Then walked away. He looked at the notebook. Then at the door. Then at the notebook again. He opened it. Nothing. Just white. Clean. Like a place where no one had written him off yet. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with the TV humming in the background. His mother on the couch, asleep, an ashtray balancing on the armrest. He took out the notebook, held the pencil the way the kids in class did, and started to write. Not words exactly. Ideas. Memories. Pictures. The way the hallway smelled before the bell rang. The sound of rain in the cafeteria skylight. The way his chest tightened when he had to read aloud. He didn't know if it was good. He didn't care. It was his. The next day he wrote again. Then the next. And the next. The notebook filled slowly, but not with the kind of writing they wanted at school. Not with essays or summaries. With scenes. Fragments. Emotions he couldn't name, shaped into lines that didn't always make sense but always felt real. In class, he still copied shapes. Still stared at pages he couldn't understand. But at night, his world expanded. He wrote about the boy in the hallway who always laughed too loudly. The teacher with lipstick on her teeth. The girl who stared out the window like she was already somewhere better. He gave them names. Stories. Voice. They never knew. He never told them. Because when people think you can't read, they never imagine you can write. The seasons changed while he wasn't looking. Fall collapsed into winter. Mornings turned colder. The sun rose later. The classroom grew dimmer. Nothing inside those four walls shifted, yet somehow everything felt heavier. The lessons dragged. The voices around him grew louder, more certain, as if confidence were a skill that could be taught. He stayed quiet. He always had. His test scores never improved. The red ink became routine. The word "see me" appeared more often than his own name. Sometimes he did see them. Sometimes he pretended not to. He was tired of seeing. Tired of the looks from other students. Tired of the teachers whose faces twisted when he stumbled over simple sentences. They didn't yell. They didn't mock. But the silence, they wielded it like a knife. He still carried the notebook. The first one was full by now. Pages curled, corners soft. Some pages had drawings. Some had rambling thoughts. Some had the kind of stories he'd never say aloud. He hid it in his backpack, behind textbooks he never opened. No one knew it existed. It was the only thing that belonged entirely to him. After school, he would walk the long way home, past the park, past the closed-up bookstore that used to run reading clubs he was never invited to, past the corner where people gathered around laughter that never reached him. He preferred it that way. The long walk gave him space to imagine. In his mind, characters began to grow. A boy who couldn't speak but could dream vividly. A girl who could draw futures with crayons. A man who remembered every detail about his life except his name. They weren't real, but they understood him better than anyone else ever had. At home, the chaos waited. The television always too loud. The kitchen always a mess. His mother asleep again, and dinner a question with no answer. But the notebook, he took it to the closet. That was his space. The one corner of the apartment where no one bothered him. He sat on a pile of blankets with a flashlight and wrote for hours. Until the letters blurred. Until the pencil dulled. Until his wrist ached. Some nights, he copied the same sentence over and over. Not because he needed practice, but because he was trying to convince himself that the sentence was true. You are not broken. The school didn't see any change. His grades stayed low. His teachers lost patience. Notes were sent home. Evaluations were suggested. The system needed boxes, labels, justifications. They said maybe he needed special help. Maybe he couldn't be mainstreamed. Maybe he'd never catch up. But he didn't want to catch up. He wanted to break free. So he wrote more. He filled another notebook. Then another. By now, he had a drawer under his bed, lined with notebooks like a row of tiny lives, hidden in spiral binding. None of them were perfect. The spelling was off. The grammar inconsistent. But the stories, they pulsed. They breathed. One afternoon, the janitor found him behind the school after a fire drill. Not hiding, just avoiding. He didn't say much. Just handed him a stack of unused legal pads. No questions. No pressure. Just supplies. A refill on belief. He nodded. That night, he wrote until the sun came up. He wasn't writing for praise. He wasn't writing for permission. He was writing because something inside him demanded to be heard. And maybe he couldn't read the way they wanted him to. But he understood story. He understood rhythm. He understood truth. And deep down, he knew someday someone else would too. He left school without ceremony. No graduation photos. No yearbook dedications. No final applause. Just a signature on a withdrawal form and a silent exit through the same door he'd entered 1,000 times. No one stopped him. No one noticed. He disappeared from the system the way he'd existed in it. Unremarked, mislabeled, forgotten. He took a job cleaning buses. It wasn't glamorous. Wasn't safe. But it paid enough for rent on a small room and meals that didn't come from a vending machine. The hours were late, the fumes strong, but he didn't mind. The city looked different at night. Softer. Like it was willing to make space for him when no one else was awake. He kept writing. Now, instead of notebooks, he used legal pads. Stacks of them stacked beneath his mattress and under the sink. He carried a small one in his jacket pocket, always. Words came when he wasn't ready. He learned to be ready anyway. At the depot, he wrote between routes. At diners, he scribbled on napkins when his pad ran out. At the laundromat, he watched the spin cycle and built plots from its rhythm. The stories matured. Characters deepened. He still didn't read much, books overwhelmed him. But movies taught him structure, dialogue, timing. He watched them like textbooks, pausing to write scenes that would never be filmed. He studied people, memorized patterns, mimicked beats. It was instinct. It was survival. He had no degree, no resume, but he had chapters. Dozens, maybe hundreds. He didn't know if they were good. He didn't care anymore. He wrote because not writing felt like suffocation. One night, while scrubbing graffiti from a seat, he imagined a story about a boy who could hear people's thoughts in color. Another about a girl who traded memories for truth. He jotted the premises down on a receipt, added them to the pile. Another night, another layer. He told no one, because telling would risk the most fragile thing he had, hope. Years passed. The notebooks multiplied. He moved from job to job, warehouse, mechanics assistant, janitorial at a hospital. People came and went. Schedules changed. But his world never did. His world was paper. Words no one knew existed, building something that didn't yet have a shape. Until one day, a voice cracked through the silence. An older woman at the shelter where he occasionally volunteered. She saw him scribbling, always scribbling, and asked what he was writing. He shrugged, said it wasn't important. She smiled the way people do when they've heard lies before and said, "Bring me 10 pages next time." He did. Not because he trusted her, but because part of him needed to believe someone might understand. She read them that night. The next day, she handed them back, creased, annotated, underlined. Not with corrections. With questions. Good ones. The kind that suggested belief. She told him it was good. He didn't know what to do with the word. She said she worked part-time at a literacy nonprofit, knew someone in publishing, no promises, but maybe. That maybe stayed with him. It echoed louder than every insult he'd ever absorbed. It vibrated against every memory of you can't even read. And so, for the first time, he typed. He borrowed a friend's laptop. Sat in a library corner for 5 hours. Fingers hesitant, clumsy. But the story came anyway. Familiar. Clean. Real. It poured out, not perfect, but undeniable. He sent it. To her. To them. Then he waited. Not with expectation, but with breath held between heartbeats. He had nothing to lose. And everything to say. The email came on a Wednesday. No subject line. Just a name in the sender field he didn't recognize and a message that was too short to be real. We read your manuscript. Call us. A number followed. That was it. He stared at it for hours. Not because he was afraid it was fake, but because it might not be. Because if it was real, then everything changed. He borrowed a friend's phone and dialed the number in the quiet corner of a parking garage where the air smelled of oil and old rubber. The voice that answered was brisk, professional, and utterly certain. She said she was with a small publishing house. That they had read the story. That it stayed with them. That it had something rare, something visceral. She didn't talk about plot. She talked about truth. He didn't say much. Didn't know how to. He agreed to a meeting. It was the first time he'd ever worn a blazer. He found one at a thrift store, too large at the shoulders, but clean. Pressed it with a hotel iron in the back of the shelter where he sometimes helped serve meals. He combed his hair. Shaved. Practiced what little eye contact he could muster. The office was small. Not glamorous. But real. The walls were lined with books. Books he hadn't read but recognized from airports and store windows. They greeted him with the same tone reserved for authors, not janitors. They asked questions. He answered carefully. Told them he didn't go to college. Didn't graduate. Didn't even know if he spelled everything right. They told him they didn't care. They cared about the feeling in the words. The pulse in the silence between the lines. They asked if he was willing to revise. He said yes. They offered a contract. He didn't read it on the spot. Not because he didn't want to, but because he wanted to understand. So he took it home. Asked a librarian he trusted to help him. They went through it page by page, late into the night, under fluorescent lights that hummed over stacks of forgotten books. He signed it the next day. The weeks that followed blurred into movement. Calls. Emails. Drafts. Feedback. Deadlines. He learned to navigate them slowly, unsure but determined. Each correction, each suggestion was not a criticism, it was a door. And he opened every one. Not because he believed he belonged, but because he finally saw where the words were taking him. The book took shape. Not just in print. In him. He stopped hiding the notebooks. Started saving them in organized stacks. Started believing that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the imposter he'd always feared he was. The publishing date was set. The cover revealed. The first shipment arrived in boxes that smelled like ink and possibility. He held it in his hands. Weighty. Clean. Sharp-edged. And real. A book. His book. The title embossed across the front like a dare to every voice that had ever told him he was less. And on the back his name. Printed clearly. Not corrected. Not questioned. His. The book didn't explode overnight. It arrived quietly. A ripple, not a wave. The first reviews came from unknown corners of the internet, small blogs, regional papers, niche communities that still cared about words more than headlines. They didn't talk about structure. They talked about how it made them feel. About the strange weight of honesty. About a voice they hadn't heard before but suddenly trusted. Sales came slowly. Then steadily. Then faster. A bookstore in Chicago put it in the staff picks section. A teacher in Atlanta read it aloud to her class. A viral post on social media compared a single paragraph to a gut punch wrapped in grace. The second printing sold out in days. He watched all of it from the same apartment. Same secondhand couch. Same beat-up shoes by the door. But the world outside that door had changed. People said his name now. Said it with respect. Said it without lowering their voices like it was a mistake. He received an invitation to speak at a literary panel. The subject line read, "Breaking the Silence, Voices from the Margins." He almost didn't respond. Almost deleted it. but something held his hand steady. He didn't say yes out of confidence. He said yes out of necessity. The room was too bright, the microphone too sharp. He stood behind a podium, palms sweating against paper he barely looked at. He didn't read from his book. He couldn't. The words were there, but his voice trembled when forced into that kind of stage. Instead, he told a story. His story. Not the version they expected. Not cleaned up. Not triumphant. Just real. He told them about sitting in classrooms that made him feel like a shadow. About copying shapes he didn't understand. About janitors with notebooks and librarians with patience. About nights spent writing in closets and mornings scrubbing bus seats. The room was still when he finished. Not because they pitied him, but because they believed him. Afterward, people lined up to shake his hand. Not influencers. Not critics. Readers. Teachers. Young men with notebooks tucked into their jackets. Old women who had lost the nerve to begin. They thanked him. Not for the book. For the permission it gave. He went home that night without speaking. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, book in his lap. Not to admire it. Just to remember that it was real. That it had survived. He still wrote every night. Still couldn't read aloud without stumbling. Still didn't like crowds. But none of that mattered anymore. Because the boy who once traced letters like a foreign alphabet now shaped them into stories the world couldn't ignore. The headlines caught up eventually. From illiteracy to bestseller, the author who couldn't read. People debated the accuracy of the phrase. Asked if it was an exaggeration. If it was part of a branding strategy. If it was true. He never corrected them. He didn't have to. Because the words spoke for themselves. And finally, the world listened. The recognition came like weather. Quiet at first, then suddenly everywhere. His face on morning shows. His name trending beside authors who'd built their careers through universities and fellowships. He wasn't one of them. He wasn't a product of their world. But his words had climbed the walls and echoed inside anyway. His inbox overflowed. Book clubs wanted Q&As. Schools requested virtual visits. Publishers offered deals for follow-ups, foreign rights, adaptations. They used phrases like, "Your voice is necessary," and "Your story matters." They meant it now. But he remembered when those same phrases were weapons wielded to exclude. He kept his circle small, trusted few. He still took long walks in quiet neighborhoods, still ducked his head when entering rooms, still felt like a stranger in spaces that suddenly applauded him. He didn't wear suits, didn't learn to pose for cameras, but he showed up. One morning, he visited the school he used to walk past as a kid, the one where the reading clubs happened without him. He parked across the street, watched as students filed in, loud and distracted, unaware of the man watching them from behind a cracked windshield. He smiled, not bitter, not triumphant, just whole. Later that day, he received a letter from the district, an invitation to speak, to share his story with students. He read it slowly, each word pressing against the old scars like fingerprints on glass. He said yes. The auditorium was too large, the lights too warm. He stood on stage, heart pounding, breath shallow. But when he looked into the crowd, he saw what mattered. Not the teachers or administrators. The kids. The ones who sat the way he used to, eyes low, feet restless, already preparing for the silence of being unseen. He didn't speak with performance. He spoke with memory. He told them the truth. About the fear of reading aloud. About pretending to write. About notebooks hidden in closets and how long it takes to believe in your own voice. He told them about the janitor. About the librarian. About the woman who said, "Bring me 10 pages. And then he held up his book. Not like a trophy, but like proof. That stories survive. That words don't care where you come from. They only ask that you come honestly." The room stayed quiet long after he left. He received letters afterward. Hundreds. Some handwritten in shaky script. Some typed in all caps. Some just a single sentence. "You made me want to write." He printed every one. Stacked them beside the notebooks. The bookshelf in his apartment was full now. Not with awards but with drafts. Unpublished. Unfinished. Untitled. He worked on them one at a time. No rush. No deadline. Just the rhythm of honesty, page after page. He never stopped doubting. But he never stopped writing. Because doubt was no longer a reason to quit. It was a reason to keep going. And whenever someone asked him how it felt to go from "you can't even read" to best-selling author, he didn't have a perfect answer. He just smiled, then wrote another page.